Episode 100. 100 shows down. I think it's actually technically like 135, but who's counting? I'm excited about tonight. I'm really happy that I've actually hit episode 100. And I really want to thank all of the listeners out there who have stuck with the show and who've really enjoyed the show. You know, it means more to me when people say, hey, there's nothing more I look forward to on Sunday night than listening to the show. And it's kind of like going back in the old times and where everyone kind of sat around the radio, listened to their favorite show. So I think it's really cool, and I really do appreciate it. You know, the idea for the show has always been to create something really cool and a safe place for people to come and talk about their encounters and have it be something that everyone enjoys. So I really do thank everyone out there who supported the show, who continues to support the show. Last week, I actually, I did 2 shows last week, and it was with Bobby Hamilton from the GCBRO, and he went in and talked about his encounter, about having one coming up to his window at night and kind of motioning for him to come to the window. And Bobby shared so much. He shared all of the encounters he's had over the years and his whole feelings on the topic, kind of his theories on what this is. And take a listen to that show if you haven't heard it. There's 2 shows that I did last week. Take a listen to them and tell me what you think. Tonight's an exciting night. I have 3 witnesses for the listening audience out there. The first person I want to actually talk to is David. And David has over 40 years of tracking animals. He's a big game hunter. He actually does calls that he records, and commercial companies out there digitize his calls for people to blast while they're out there hunting. So David knows his way around the woods. And David actually ran into, I'll let David tell the story, but pay close attention to the details that he's describing on what he actually ran into. You know, David, when you and I spoke the other day, I'm sorry I couldn't provide any comforting words for you on what you ran into. I've heard of it before. I've talked to a lot of witnesses before that have ran into what you ran into, which is a little bit different than Sasquatch. But if you would, we take the audience back to the day of your encounter, describe what you were doing, and then describe what you ran into.
Yeah, the day, to just reflect back on the day, it had been something that I'd done numerous times before, many trips out there to the same location because I've hunted that place. I know it like the back of my hand. I've been going there for 25 years. It was the day that I was actually hunting by myself, and I'm kind of used to that because I do better when I am taking pictures, and that was one of the things I was doing that day. I did some photography work, and I was calling coyotes up close to the camera, just going out there and taking photographs, and the only thing I was carrying with me then was a handgun. You know, I usually don't even take that if I'm taking pictures. But it just so happened to be I was going to be in an area where I've called some big coyotes before, so later in the day I was going to hunt with my rifle the last part of the day. You know, the day was a good, sunshiny day. There was hardly any wind, and I started out in the morning at daylight and started getting coyotes coming in on every stand just about. It took, I don't know, something like 25, 30 pictures of different coyotes that I called in that morning and afternoon. And I just kind of drove to a pump jack there in one of the oil wells and kicked back and ate a sandwich and just kind of rested for a little bit. And I was waiting a couple hours for the evening hunt. So I was going to hunt with a rifle that evening because there was a good chance of maybe killing a big one. So I drove into an area that the stand I've hunted, I couldn't tell you how many times I've hunted it. I mean, I know it like the back of my hand. So I drove my truck up there, up the pump road, and got out. And as soon as I got out, I noticed these funky tracks. I thought, I ain't never seen tracks like that, you know. But what I could see was 3 toes at first. And I tracked it for quite a ways up the road, but it was you know how the road is like where the truck drives down the center, there'll be grass in the high spot. Right. And this thing was walking down the center of that road, so the split was kind of off to the edge, it looked like. So when I got to where the road had ended, the tank battery where I was going to, I saw one track that had 5 toes on it, but the length of the track was like 9 inches long. So, I thought, man, that is weird. I've never seen nothing like that, So I just kind of looked at it for a second, kind of blew it off. I didn't think too much about it. And the wind was behind me, and I don't normally call with the wind behind me like that, but I was up high on a kind of a mesa, so if anything came in under me, I'd have a chance to shoot it. So I sat down and got ready to start calling, and I made this call myself, and I've used it. When I started the calling stand, I always sat down and let the area calm down before I start and look everything over the binoculars first in case you see anything standing out there. You want to blast them out of the area. So I started the calling sequence, and I blew one series, and I, kind of waited and looked, and there wasn't anything there. So I looked the area over pretty good, so I did what I normally did. I started another sequence, and about halfway through that sequence, I saw something coming around the edge of this canyon, up of what we call a dry wash up there, just a long finger, low valley in the brush, It was solid black, and I thought, when I first seen it, I thought, what the hell is a black bear doing this far east out of the Rocky Mountains? I thought, I've never seen no bears out here before, or any bear tracks at all. It was coming, in on all fours. So that's why I thought it was a bear. I mean, I could see it out there, way out there, and I usually, we range everything on a mill. You know how a mill-dot reticle works on a scope?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, well, so you learn to range up mill-dot reticle in the military and stuff. So, we leave them on 10 power so we can get an accurate figure on the mill-dot rating. So, scope was on 10 power, and I was looking at this thing, and it was coming in. I was sure it was a bear. I mean, it was black. It was that kind of a size. And I thought, man, it's going to be a black bear. It's going to run right over me. I've never seen nothing like this. So it kept coming, and when it got to about 400 yards, it just, all of a sudden, it stood up. And that's when I freaked out. I mean, this thing stood up, and when it stood up in the reticle, I could tell it was about 8 feet tall. And, I mean, hair stood up on the back of my neck. That's the only time I've ever been concerned in the woods or any hunting, any expedition ever. I've hunted all over the United States in just about every state you can think of for coyotes, lions, and hunted at night all over the desert, bow hunted all over Oklahoma and Colorado and different places, and never had a concern ever, even with bears. I was never afraid of bears. And this thing, when it stood up, I mean, it kind of shook me a little bit. And so I had to look twice at what I was looking at, so I could tell it was about 8 feet tall on the mill-dot reticle. So I cranked the scope up to 24 power, and that's when I really got concerned. I looked right into its face, and this thing looked like a Bigfoot, but it was shoulders super wide, 3 foot wide at least, maybe 4. It had a dog's face. You could definitely tell the snout and the nose, and the ears were like a Doberman Pinscher, and they were sticking straight up about 3 to 4 inches high. Like I said, I'm hunting with my AR-15, and in Oklahoma, they don't like for you, the state law says you can't use more than 5 rounds in a magazine. So I had 5 rounds in the mag. So when I seen this thing, I got concerned. So I dropped that 5-round magazine, and I shoved in the 20-round magazine, because I always carry one in my pocket to carry my extra rounds in. And I thought, man, if this thing charges me, I'm going to be in trouble. So I didn't have my handgun with me. I have a 1911 I usually carry with me, but I didn't have it on that day. All I have is the AR-15 and my binoculars. This thing stands up. It looks at me. It looks right into the scope. It blinks its eyes. I can see everything perfectly. I mean, that scope is crystal clear. I have the best optics money can buy. It looks left. It looks right. It takes about 3 or 4 feet, comes ahead, and I think it's going to come on in. So, man, I flipped the safety off. I got ready. I mean, I was fixing to give this thing the whole 20 rounds when it got to about 100 yards. And all of a sudden, it just turned on a dime, and it hauled ass out of there, and it covered 200 or 300 yards in like 5 or 6 seconds. I mean, it was the fastest thing I'd ever seen. It had jumped over a 5-strand barbed wire fence like it wasn't even there. It went out across the road, went out across the oil field, and over into this other draw there, and I couldn't believe it. I was looking around to see if there was any more of them, But that really freaked me. I mean, I couldn't believe the size of this thing.
So over 40 years of experience, you've been out in the woods. You know what you're running into. You know what different animals are. You know when you're seeing a bear. You know when you're seeing something that's not a bear. Was this the first time you've ever ran into something unknown when you're out there in the woods?
Yeah, that's the first time I've ever run into anything like that. I mean, I've been out we go out night calling and doing expositions for magazines and stuff where we were calling predators in at night and calling them up close to the truck. And sometimes we get away from the truck. I'd have to get off the truck and go out with the camera while my partner held the spotlight. I'd take pictures of these big bobcats and coyotes, right? I mean, just, 6, 7 feet away sometimes. And was never concerned one bit, walking around out there in the dark. I mean, I've been out hunted all over Nevada, Arizona, New Mexico, out in the middle of the desert, where most people would be afraid to be out there at night a lot of times, but it never did concern me. And the biggest thing about it was that I wasn't a Bigfoot follower, one of these guys that reads like magazine stories and just following every TV show and all this stuff. My dad had taken me to see the Roger Patterson film when it came out back in the 70s. So I would have been about 8 or 9 years old when I seen that film. And my dad ended up in Oregon with my mom's cousin up there, and that was, when I was little, they talked about it and stuff, what they'd do if they'd ever see one. And that's about as far as it went until I started, I'm a welder by trade. I mean, I work on power plants and aircraft plants. I do engine work for the government and stuff, and I've done every aspect of welding. But when I was working on this one plant, I ran into these guys, and they had a ranch down in southeastern Oklahoma and LaFleur County. You probably know that area well, I'm sure, from your background.
Yeah.
And that's down around Honubby, where where what's his name, Mike?
Yeah, Mike Humphreys, Siege of Hobby. Yeah.
Yeah, I had the encounter down there. Matter of fact, I started bow hunting down there a few years after that had happened, and those guys down there in that camp where we were at were still talking about that incident, and a lot of them didn't believe it. They said, you saw a bear or this or that. But I didn't give it too much concern, but thought across my mind once or twice, walking to my bow stand in the dark down there in the Comanche Mountains, what would I do if I ran onto one of these deals? Or even if I was in my tree stand and I saw one. So I knew they were real. I mean, as much as I know about animals, calling them in and doing the things that I've done with my photography and stuff, I know, and tracking animals, I know that Patterson film was real. Anybody with an ounce of sense can see that's not a hoax. And it would have been very hard to hoax that good of a suit back in those days. Never give it any thought, like I said, I wasn't a Bigfoot follower. I knew the creature was probably real, but we never thought they was in Oklahoma. I mean, I never heard of them being down there till I ran onto these guys I was welding with at the power plant, and I started hunting down that part of the country with them.
Now, let me ask you, when you saw this creature, can you kind of describe it for the audience?
It was running on all fours down close to the ground. When it stood up, when I got a good look at it, it was, I cranked that scope up on 24 power, and I had it sitting on a set of shooting sticks, so it was rock solid. And I could see the muzzle of this thing. It looked like a dog, or a wolf. It just had a big, long snout, and the eyes weren't real big. They were just like a couple little marbles, But the main thing was the ears. I could see those ears, and the ears were moving on the head. You know how a dog will move his ears when he's listening?
Right.
Well, those ears were moving the same way. He was listening, and I think he was listening for my call, because he knew the direction that call would come from. And I noticed that the front feet, or what I call feet, the arms were long, about the chest and area was real wide, but the shoulders came down, and it wasn't like dog's paws. It looked more like hands. You could see the distinct fingers on the hand. As the body came down, it wasn't like you normally see these pictures of a Sasquatch where it's thick and heavy on the legs, and it was thinner, come down more slender like a dog's leg to the bottom. But it freaked me. I mean, it was just as much as it'd be like a coyote or a wolf standing on his hind leg and look like he'd been with a bodybuilder.
And what would you guess would be the weight of the animal?
from the size of it, looking at it through the scope, when I ranged it on 10 power with the mill dot reticle, as tall as it was, it would have been 600 or 700 pounds easy. I mean, this thing I couldn't believe how wide its shoulders was. I mean, it was definitely very thick in the top of the body when it went down to its waist. I mean, it was super heavy. So you're talking about an animal that tall and that big would have to weigh between, probably a closer estimation, I'd say at least 600 pounds.
So when it ran off, it actually ran off on 2 legs, correct?
Right. It turned. Well, what it did is when it got up on 2 legs, it knew where the sound came from. It knew. It had to be pinpointed. It had to, because, okay, well, you know, when you're hunting coyotes, you blow that call, and they can come from a long ways off, and they can pinpoint you within a couple of feet where you're at. And this thing was looking right at me. I don't think he's seen me. I think he might have smelled me because the wind was at my back. And he was farther down that draw. It was kind of, actually, it started up around the edge of the canyon there. He was kind of up on the edge of that. He turned his head to the left, but looked down the draw. He turned his head back to the right to look over towards the road, and then looked back at me, and then took a couple of more steps. He come forward, and then he stopped. And then he just turned around and just, man, he was out of there. And I couldn't believe, you know, the speed of this thing. I mean, I shoot some fast rifles. That was my normal coyote gun, because if I'm shooting big coyotes, I don't like to blow the hides up on them. So I shoot a 223, which is the AR-15. And as fast as that thing moved, I've shot a lot of coyotes running in the time that I've been doing this. And I'm telling you, I would have had to have a pretty good lead on that thing to hit him. I mean, he would have been in the edge of the scope, probably, if I'd had to lead him that far, if he was moving.
You brought up Mike Humphreys from the Siege of Hanabi. And one of the things that, when I spoke with Mike about his encounter, when you talk with him, he was talking about a time one had jumped out of his dumpster and took off running on 2 legs. He had a gun on him, and he said, Wes, I don't think I could have. He goes, it was moving so fast. He goes, I don't think I could have picked it off. It was moving that fast.
So Mike said he didn't think he could have shot. How far was it away when he was?
I don't remember the distance that he said, but he said the same thing you just said. He goes, man, you'd have to have a major lead on it, and everything happened so quick. He goes, I don't think I could have hit it. He goes, if I would have fired, really don't think I would have hit it.
Well, shooting at these coyotes running out on the desert, you know, is I've been doing it so long, I've gotten pretty good at it. And even with an AR don't shoot at about 3,400. So we have to lead them pretty good at 300 and 400 yards. You got to lead them pretty good with that. But I'm talking about this animal was so fast. If I'd have been shooting my 6 improved, I'd have had to lead that thing like I did with the AR. I mean, it was incredible. This thing would have smoked a coyote, and a coyote can run 40 miles an hour. So you're talking about, you'd have had to trap this thing in the scope. You'd have had to lead way past him, and just when you seen him come into the scope, you'd have had to shoot. And something running on 2 legs doesn't give you the length of kill zone that it does if it's running on 4.
Has this changed your mind on going out in the woods and being out there alone?
I mean, I like I said, I've bow hunted. I've been a bow hunter too all my life, you know, and I mean, I've probably now, for listening to your shows and some of the things I've heard other people say, I wouldn't go out in the woods with my bow without carrying my 1911. I would always carry that 45 automatic. That'd be a last-ditch effort, but I mean, I think you could kill a Bigfoot or anything on top of you with a 45 if you have the right bullets in it. But no, it hasn't changed my theory on it. Matter of fact, it's made me think about, you know, actually trying to do a little more investigation and see if I can find this thing. Because this call that I have, that I invented myself, he came to that call just like a coyote would. And I mean, he was coming hard and fast till he got to 400 yards. And then he just stopped out there, and that's when he stood up. So the sound that I use is not, this is a call I haven't sold because I sell calls on the market. I've never released this sound. And I've made a lot of sounds for electronic call companies. It's just now that I know that this thing works on this animal, I probably won't release it.
It's almost like the creature either heard you when you snapped in the larger clip, and it knew it was walking into a trap, or both?
Well, I don't know, because when he stood, when he stood up, I mean, from being in this business, as far as hunting coyotes, working with that AR, I mean, I just didn't drop the magazine on the ground. I just released it down in my hand. I laid it down on the ground, reached in and got the other one and just clipped it in. I already had his round chambered, so the magazine would have followed up. It would have picked up the rest of the rounds if I'd have needed them. But I think he smelled me, or he knew something wasn't right. I think he smelled me, because there was a light wind from the north. And a lot of guys, the general theory is when you're hunting coyotes is to put the wind in your face. But if you're a good enough rifle shot and you know how to work the animals, you can let that wind blow to them and still get them.
Sasquatch are known to be aggressive, or they can be aggressive. We have many, many reports of them being aggressive. What you ran into, though, is something, I wish I could give you some great knowledge on what you actually ran into. Your description of the creature that you ran into, I've never heard anything good ever said about that creature, ever. See, the thing that throws me off about what you ran into, I've talked to a lot of hunters, and I've talked to a lot of researchers and a lot of witnesses too. And one of the things they'll tell you when they run into what your description is, it's not a primate. They'll come out and say it's definitely a canine. It was canine what I ran into.
Well, that's what this thing was, definitely dog in the face. So what I don't understand is how would it be? It has the same features as a Bigfoot on top. I mean, the wide shoulders, the forearms, and the biceps and stuff are massive. They're huge, and it gets down to the hand. And then it's got hands like a man. So, it freaked me out. I mean, you hear about werewolf stories and all this, and everybody's watched these movies on TV, but I mean, until you see something like that, I never did believe it. I always laughed at that stuff, but then when I seen this, I mean, all the way home, driving home, I thought, man, I was just trying to figure out how many times have I been out there walking around out there with a gun in my hand, with a camera, away from the truck, and bow hunting, walking in my tree stand in the dark, coming out in the dark, and you don't know if these things are watching you. You don't know if they're there.
Well, and that's the thing that throws me off about your type of encounter, because everyone I've talked to, see, we've speculated, we've had people that said they're from the government that claimed there was a different type of Sasquatch, and that may be that this might be another type of Sasquatch, kind of like the baboon. The baboon is probably one of the most aggressive primates out there. They generally are in a bad mood 24/7. They seem to be more vicious than a lot of other primates. But the thing that throws me off about this type of encounter, you've been out there hunting for over 40 years. I've talked to other people that have been hunting that have no clue about Bigfoot, that have been out hunting for many, many years, and they'll run into one of these things. And I had a guy when I was down in Texas, first thing he said to me was, Wes, this wasn't a primate. He goes, you guys have this whole thing wrong. This wasn't a primate. And the description he gave is identical to the description you just gave. He said it had Doberman pinscher ears on the top of its head, and it kind of would move them like it was trying to listen, like how you'd see a dog do. And he said it was definitely a dog's head. It was not a primate's head. And so I'm kind of thrown, I don't know what to think, and then even being down there in Texas, finding the tracks that I found, those weren't primate tracks. Those were something else. And the vocalizations that we heard were something else.
I've heard some of these sounds I've heard on your channel, these weird sounds. I know that I heard them same sounds and we couldn't pinpoint it. We just thought it was a great big coyote out there howling in the distance. And who knows, it could have been this thing, you know what I mean? There were times we went into this same area and hunted, and we would see nothing. There was no rabbit, there was no birds. I mean, it was like a wasteland out there. And I was talking to a guy that was a biologist, and he said, well, that thing could have come through there, Dave, and everything just left the area, and the next time you go back and it hasn't been through there and everything's moved back into the area. So there's 2 or 3 different theories on it. But I know the vocalizations are a main thing of this Bigfoot deal. If I was these people, I wouldn't be out there going around making Bigfoot sounds in the middle of the night. They might get something they don't want.
That's the thing we always warn, I was always trying to warn people is be careful when you call something in, you might regret calling in, and I don't know that a lot of people call it. Well, I take that back. Down in Texas, there was guys that were using, primate calls to call them in. But, in your situation, calling in a predator and you got what you were trying for.
This thing came like he was a freight train. He was carrying the mail coming in, and until he got to that 400-yard mark, and then he stopped. The biggest deal. People go out there, and I watch these guys on TV, this call blasting deal. I mean, them guys ain't gonna find nothing. They ain't gonna get nothing the way they go about it. They got an entourage of people with them, waving lights around, 2 or 3 cameramen. They got all these funky ass sounds they're playing, and they got a hi-fi stereo system out there they're blasting the woods with. Animals ain't going to come into that. They're not going to get anything like that. These things make their living out there. They know when something sounds real and when it don't.
No, and you said it. You definitely said it. I really do appreciate you coming on the show and sharing. And be careful when you're out there with what you ran into. You got to be careful of Sasquatch, but this other thing, you got to be even more on top of your game with this thing. I've just heard too many bad things about it. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing. I hope more people come forward who've seen something like this will come forward and say, hey, I saw that too. Because the reports of the quote-unquote dogman are pretty rare. But one thing I'll say about the reports is they are consistent.
Well, now I'm probably going to end up, we're going to pay more attention to what we're doing and when we're hunting there, but we're going to be looking for this thing. And when I use that call, I'll be using it to look for him. But I did leave out one thing I was going to tell you. I was working on a job for the government up in Pueblo, Colorado, at a weapons plant up there, and I had this kid working for me, and he lived down there around where this guy lived at Hodenver. He lived at around Tallahassee up in there. And this kid had a sighting back in the 80s of him and his brother. He told me, he was in my motel room telling me about it, and it was actually documented. It's still on the internet. I looked the story up and looked at it in the newspaper article that they wrote about him and his brother. They seen this. They were at a fort they had built down not far from their house. And him and his brother went down there every day and was playing with this with his little kids. And he said that he raised up out of the top of that thing, and that there was a Bigfoot standing about 12 feet from him with the trees spread apart looking at him. They tore that fort down, getting out there, running for the house, and they told their mom what they'd seen. Of course, she didn't believe them, So they had to wait for their dad to get home, and I guess their dad went down there, and he looked all around. They found tracks and stuff, and them boys, they never would. John told me, he said they never would go back down to that fort. They never went back down there, but he said, you could smell it, and it's just the same consistent report that you give on all the other sightings, And this is two young kids, telling their folks about it, and this guy's a good Christian guy. He wouldn't make anything up like that. He told it, from his heart, so I know what he's saying was true.
I definitely believe him. Well, David, thank you again.
I want to be looking for this thing. If I have another encounter, I'll let you know.
Yeah, please do. Please let me know if you run into it again, and be careful. I know you'll be careful while you're out there, but I feel like I got to say it anyway. Be careful while you're out there, and thank you again.
Okay, Wes, good talking to you.
Thanks, David. Next on the show, I want to go ahead and bring Bill on. Bill, your encounter is very, very interesting because there's multiple witnesses and there's evidence that was left behind. If you would go ahead and start from the beginning, maybe start with the tracks, talk about kind of what you were doing and what you found out there, and then kind of walk us into the encounter.
Okay. First off, basically, it was sophomore in high school. It was in the winter of 81 to 82. We were living in a little place just west of Round Mountain, California, off of 299 East, and it's over about 2,000 foot elevation. fairly mild winter, but we did have some snow on the ground, maybe 4 or 5 inches or so. Brother and I had to walk up and down along with the other kids on the road, a muddy single width dirt road that was maybe 3/4 of a mile to a mile long, just to get down to the paved area where we could get on the school bus and ride it into town every day. And one day we were out playing on the road, not necessarily a school day, and we had seen something off to the side. We'd walked over there, and it was myself, brother, and I, and a friend, and we found a bobcat literally ripped in half. It looked like somebody had almost cut it in half. It was fairly clean ripped. But there was no signs of chew marks or anything on it, which is kind of unremarkable, you know. At that time, never watched any real monster movies other than Frankenstein, Dracula, that kind of thing. So, you know, I didn't really know about Bigfoot. Didn't really think about it. There wasn't that much snow there. It was on the side of the hill that got a little bit of sun, so that we didn't see any tracks or anything. We weren't really looking for them. But it just seemed really weird that if an animal was big and tough enough to take down a full-size bobcat, why it wouldn't eat it? You know, we just didn't understand that part.
Yeah, and that's odd to find a bobcat just cleanly ripped in half. You know, if a bear would have got a hold of it, or any other predator would have got a hold of the bobcat, bobcats aren't really an easy predator to take down, you know, unless you have a rifle. But it would have been a bloody mess if another predator, you know, you would have think it would have ate it. That's strange finding it.
Yeah, and having the two halves of it were laying there on the ground, separated by maybe 10 to 12 inches of space, with not much around it in you know, in the way of look like blood splatter all over the place. It was kind of isolated to just the cat, you know. Almost it was ripped apart and then put down on the ground. You know, we didn't really think much about it until a few days later. At that point in time, brother and I went outside to play, and it was an old A-frame house on 40 acres of land right next to a creek, and the hillside on one side of the little road that came into the property had the cut that bulldozer makes to allow, you know, level traffic to go through, and then the cut was maybe 4 or 5 feet high or so, maybe slightly taller than that. Then it went straight up the hillside at about 30, 35 degree angle. And we had a little flat level spot where the house was, and then about maybe 30 to 40 feet deep of woods on the other side of the house that went to the creek. On the other side of the creek was maybe only 10 to 20 feet of woods, depending on the bend in the road, and then Highway 2 was right there. But it was thick enough that when you went down 299, you couldn't look through and see our house. So, you know, I had some good cover over there. Well, the brother and I, we walked out, and we were out playing in the snow, and we were going to try and make a snowman at first, and it was too hard. It was icy. It was hard. There was no way to scoop up enough to make a snow, and there's only like 4 or 5 inches on the ground anyhow. So we got to another area of the yard looking to try and find softer snow, and we found footprints. And it was weird because one foot looked normal but just huge, and the other foot looked the same, but it had the clubbed big toe on it. The tracks, we were thinking about whoever made these was dumb. They could even make a matching to the other foot, you know. We thought it was a total joke. We didn't really think anything much about it. When I went to go kind of measure it up, I'm wearing cowboy boots, and I stand with my cowboy boot in the track, put my heel up against the imprint of the heel, and the end of my foot would barely come to about the space where the toe touched the actual foot itself of the print. It was a little freaky. Plus, I'm walking around leaving imprints that are a half-inch deep. These things were like 3 to 4 inches deep in the snow. So something very large had to have made these. They came from the direction of the creek, crossed behind the house. They went over a little wooden post with 3 barbed wire strand fence that separated the house property from the road. These tracks had walked over at about a 6-foot space between them, stepped over the fence. We didn't see any signs of anything touching the fence, which was a bit weird. One footprint in the middle of the roadway, and the next footprint was on the side of the hill about 1.5 feet up from the cut. and then they went straight up the side of the hill, through the brush and everything. My brother and I had to give each other a boost to try to get up there. Only one of us could get up on the hill. We couldn't pull the other one up. It was too steep, the cut was, too high. He finally got on the side of it. He tried walking up with vibrant soles on his shoes, and he could not walk up the side of this hill. This thing had footprints only as far as you could see going up the hill, up into the brush, and disappeared. We really didn't want to go any much further, facing whatever that was.
I don't blame you. So with the footprints, was one of them, you said, was kind of deformed?
I can't remember, honestly, right foot or left, which one it was, because we're talking a long time ago. But I remember one of them was a normal-looking footprint, and the other one, the big toe, was kind of clubbed. It was kind of bent over, like it had an injury or broke the toe or something sometime. And like I said, at first, when my brother and I saw them, we thought somebody had made some cardboard cutout, or some plywood, cutout, and, was making footprints in the snow. But we're going, how are they doing it 6 feet apart without leaving any other footprints in between? And why would one of them be crooked when the other one's straight? You would think they'd flip the pattern over and they'd have it for the other foot. We were kind of writing it off as a joke until a couple days later.
I would imagine, too, at that moment, you would have seen there's 6 feet between each time it's taken a step down and it steps over a fence. I mean, that's pretty hard to fake, especially the weight when you see it going down 3 inches into the ice and you're walking around in your boots and you're barely even breaking the ice. And then seeing this thing, seeing the footprints go, up this mountain. What did you and your brother talk about it?
We talked about it a little bit, and we actually told our friend that lived a little further down the road. He was in a more of a flat field, maybe 400 yards down the road from us. We talked to him about it a little bit, and he basically laughed at us. And we were trying to explain to him what had gone on. And by then, the sun had melted and came back out, and it kind of deformed the footprint, so it didn't look as sharp as it did the day my brother and I saw it. We'd gone out there I had a different pair of boots on, so all three of us are wearing kind of an army-style boot with a good sole on it. And we're out on the flat dirt road, and we says, okay, we marked off 6 feet, and we're trying to make 6-foot prints. Well, to do it, we had to be running at a good clip to try and even get close to 6 feet. And when we're trying it, we're not actually getting close enough to 6 feet. But when our footprints would hit, the heel would slide a little bit, the toe would push off a little bit. It was a fairly clear-looking print like we were looking at. We were tearing up the hole as we were making our footprints going down the muddy road. So just that in itself was enough to get my friend to scratch his head a little bit, but still all three of us weren't really much of a believer at that point.
And then what happened next?
A couple of days later, considering this house had no phone in it, we only lived there for the one winter, about 3/4 a year total. My mom had graduated so she'd gone back to college to get a GED. And she was taking anthropology classes with a couple other ones, but she was in town at school. It was one of those days that we had off for a snow day, but the college didn't. My brother and my stepdad were all sitting in the living room. The way the house was very rectangular in footprint, and the living room came in off the, south end of the house. The living room was on the east wall. My mom's bedroom was on the west wall. Kitchen and dining room were on the north wall, and then the kids' bedrooms were upstairs. Well, my cat was in my mom's bedroom, meowing its head off. It had just been, it's winter, so it's dark at 5:30. It's probably 6:30. And the cat's meowing like crazy. My stepdad says, why don't you go let the cat out? Well, to this point, we saw some goofy footprints, and we thought somebody was playing with us. We didn't really pay much attention to it. My sister walks into my mom's bedroom. She bends over and picks the cat up in her left hand. She takes her right hand and she flips the curtains over, and which were kind of laced, so it was kind of a see-through curtain almost. She flips it over, and she flips the light on, and she says for a second she was stunned because she's looking going, why is there no light out there? Then she kind of looked up, and as she looked up, she noticed a pair of eyes. It was standing on the deck less than 1.5 feet away from the glass door, staring down through the lace curtains at the cat. And she didn't notice it was even, she stared right at it at first and thought it was just darkness. She looked up and saw the light of the eyes. She said they had kind of a slight glow to it, like deer in a headlight kind of eye shine, you know? She screamed at the top of her lungs, dropped the cat, and basically just froze. We came running into the bedroom to see what was going on, and it was already gone. It had leapt off the porch and took off into the bushes. It was clean gone by the time we got in the other room. The other three members of us were in the living room. We're talking 20 feet distance away and had to run around a corner, and it was completely gone. So it moved really quickly. Out in the snow at that time of day, my brother and I, there's no way we could have covered that distance in the time it took us to get to the bedroom.
What did your sister say that she saw?
She said that the eyes were about the height of maybe an inch above or below, but right at about the height of the top of the door frame of a standard sliding glass door. That's where the eyes were. She couldn't see the top of its head because the angle she was standing at, and the thing was so close to the glass, that far up. She says they had a shine on it. They had kind of a reddish colored shine. And she says the hair on it was really dirty, like somebody had not washed their hair in a couple of months. You know, really matted and dirty, and also looked like it had patches of hair missing on it, like it had mange or something. She said it had a really wide face, and the nose was not like a normal human nose, but it wasn't real flat like an ape's nose. And she didn't get much detail about that, other than that, I should say, that I can remember right offhand. Just huge, dark-colored, you know, I don't know if it was the time of day, but she said the fur was really blackish-colored at the time.
So you guys all go running in there, and I can just imagine the scene. You guys all go running in there. She gets done screaming. She looks to you guys. You know, in her words, what did she say she saw?
She was really just at that moment. I mean, I had to get the description out of her at a later time. At that moment, she was kind of almost like stunned, almost in shock, kind of babbling more than anything. And it was really hard to make out anything because we tried to talk to her, and she just sat there and kept staring at the window, and just eyes 3 times the size of normal and mouth open, just like in a amazement and shock is all I can, you know, say with the immediate look on her face. She was extremely terrified and did not want to go anywhere near the sliding glass door, much less go outside. One of the parts that made it even weirder was what happened about 2.5 hours later. As we had no telephone, there was no way to contact my mom. She was coming home from school down that dirt road, where close to where we saw the bobcat before, and in the mud and everything, you're trying to ditch the deeper potholes and mud holes in there. So she's swinging the car around a pothole, which wasn't kind of directly lined up with the road. The headlights are pointing slightly off to the left, and she saw what she described as the Godzilla standing next to the road. My mom freaked out. She said she stared at it for a few seconds. Said immediately it freaked her out. She stepped on the gas pedal, full speed down this road, which is, you don't want to drive down over 10 miles an hour in a 4-wheel drive. She's doing it in a Ford station wagon, going as fast as she can down this road. Honking, lights flashing, comes sliding into the house and almost hits the corner of the house with the car, jumps out with the door open, engine running, and flies to the front door, screaming her brain off. I saw Godzilla, I saw Godzilla. And it took us a little bit to calm her down to try and figure out what it was, and she described exactly what my sister had seen, except that my mom says at the height she was sitting in the car, it appeared to be a male. But that was the only real information we could have got out of my mother at that time.
So she said it was definitely a male, is what she was looking at.
Yeah, she said that she saw enough to believe that it was a male Sasquatch. She didn't know at the time, you know, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Everybody kind of heard of it, but nobody knew anything about it. We'd never seen any movies, TV, any of that. We'd never watched Doggy Creek or any of that stuff before that. she'd gone in the next day to her school. She talked to an anthropology professor after class, and he gave her the name of a guy named Ivan Marks. And Ivan Marks eventually came out to the house a short time later, gave her some basic information, and says that, try this and try that and see, he thinking that it was going to be all Mr. Lovable character. Why don't you go put out some food out on the back porch? Which she put a 5-pound can of green beans on the back porch, cut the lid off of it, and left the thing right at the edge of the porch. Later that night, we didn't hear anything. The noise was really, really quiet. There was no crickets chirping. There was nothing really going on at night, but we didn't really think much about it. We come out in the morning, and the green bean can is sitting right where it was. We had no indication that it had been moved on the edge of the porch. And the green beans were all missing out of the can, like something was breaching it with a can. Well, I know a bear or something stick its head in there, but bears are clumsy, and they usually knock the damn can down. The green beans were all missing. We didn't think much about it until we looked off the edge of the porch, and there was more feet prints standing right at the bottom of the porch. The porch had no rail on it. It was about 3.5 feet off the ground. So something, a normal human size could have walked up and did it. But again, it was those giant feet prints. She went and called Ivan on the phone. Ivan came out and actually casted the print.
How long did you guys live in this property?
2/3 to 3/4 of a year, maybe 8 to 10 months, 7, 8, 10 months, somewhere around that neighborhood. We'd gotten up there, 40 acres of land. The price was right. School bus was only a mile away. So it seemed like something we could all do. But that ended up by my mom and dad decided there's no way we're spending another winter there, and they totally gave up on the property and moved back to town.
Did you ever talk to any of the neighbors to find out if they've ever seen anything?
Myself and my brother, our friends that we went to school with lived a couple of houses down on the same road. There's only about 5 or 6 of us houses on the road at that time, and there were a few houses down, like I said, in the wide open area. We were all about the same ages, and we talked to them, but we didn't really talk to any parents in any of the other households. I don't know if my mom or stepdad ever did. My one friend, when we were trying to do the test, he's kind of laughing at us, and then we're doing the test to check the 6-foot spacing with our boots, trying to duplicate it ourselves, and couldn't do it. That kind of gave him a little indication that maybe, we weren't messing with him, but that we were still a little crazy. And most of the people I've ever told the story to, a couple of them are interested, and everybody else seemed to think I was fruity at the time, like I had lost my marbles. So didn't want to kill a whole bunch of people and ended up in a loony bin or something,
Yeah, no, I hear you. Well, how does your sister feel about the subject today? Has she been affected by what she saw?
There's none of us are living out in the country. I still like to go out in the country, and I can't do much hiking with a bad back anymore, but I get out when I can. I love to go fishing. Always love the outdoors, but I'm to the point myself where it freaked me out enough. I just don't want to set maybe a camping area with dozens and dozens of campers around us might not be that bad, but I don't want to be remote by myself or with just me and 1 or 2 friends. I'm not secure enough knowing that thing's out there to do that.
Did you guys have any more incidences around the property before you moved out?
Well, we knew to keep an eye out for certain things, and we would come out the front door occasionally, and we would smell the air, and it would smell like a combination of sewer, dirty, wet dog, and something, like a lot of bad trash or something. It's just a really rotten smell, but we'd only got it 2 or 3 times. My mom claimed at night that she heard a howl one night, and she did the howl that actually sounds like what I've heard on your show over the last couple of months. Like a deep-throated coyote, meets huge ape-man kind of howl. It was
right.
Nothing that was ever in the neighborhood before we actually saw the thing. We had been on that property already for a few months, and my brother and I hiked all over that hill. We had no problem. We were out there by ourselves. the huge 40 acres, we covered all of it plus out into the neighbor's property. After this thing, we didn't go out again. We've lived in many houses where we've had bears digging our trash and, coyotes and wolves and all kinds of stuff in the wild. Have seen dozens and dozens of wildlife shows. I know what certain things sound like, and this was nothing like we've heard exactly before,
And what part of the country was this in?
It's probably 20 to 30 miles. I don't know the exact distance, east of Redding, California, Redding is about 150 miles north of Sacramento.
Yeah.
Right in the center of the state, and I-5 runs right through it. Far enough back that we're only up about 2,000 foot elevation roughly, but if you look at it on an aerial map, we're off close to one of the big arms of Shasta Lake, like a small mountain range, hill range separated us from that, which would have been a fairly quiet area on the lake. So I don't think there's any marinas or anything out in that end of the lake out there. There's also, we're out towards the Cascades. We're in the foothills kind of towards the Cascade Mountain range out there.
It's a good thing it didn't go violent, but it's, something like this is terrifying enough. I can't imagine being your mom and then your sister and, you finding prints. I'm just glad nothing bad had happened to you guys when, in this situation. And I don't know how your mom and your sister felt about the subject before all of this, or even how you felt about it before all of this. But when this stuff happens, I always say it's all fun and games until something like this comes forth into someone's reality, and then you realize, oh crap, these things are actually real.
Yes. I can imagine, the Loch Ness Monster people. It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And if something came up, lifted your boat out of the water, you change your mind real quick. And it was, like I said, no monster movies other than Godzilla, Dracula, and Frankenstein. And then all of a sudden, there's something 7, 8 foot tall walking around our house that shouldn't be there. And it definitely wasn't a bear. It was real eye opener. And it kind of sucks to make me not want to go out into the woods anymore. So I like being out in the nature. But this is just enough nowadays where I don't trust it. I've seen a few episodes of this and that on TV. Some of those things are so ridiculous, and then I start listening to people that have, not a producer's point of view, but the actual persons who have seen it point of view. And those people all seem, like we hear on your show, they all give a perspective that those producers don't get. And it's like, I'm not going out there I'm going out there for myself to enjoy nature. I'm not going out there to bang on trees and make something extremely mad in their territory. All animals get territorial. There's no way I want to make something that's big enough to flip a truck over mad at me,
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's funny, I just had Bobby Hamilton on, and he's one of the co-founders of the GCBRO, and he's talking about his encounters, and he was talking about kind of he had to learn on the fly, like we all do, when you go out there and you're looking for these things. And he was saying, you get in a bad situation, it's realistically, it's put everything, let's be real with everyone for a moment. You're really out searching for a large grizzly bear that's smart, just like a primate, that may or may not kill you if you get too close or if it's pissed off that day. So people got to be aware of what they're actually going out there and what they're looking for. And you're right. You go out there, you start banging on trees, you do something that pisses them off. You may regret the day you actually run into one.
It's so true. And I kind of go to a foreign country. And here we're talking about the burp at the dinner table. But you go to a foreign country, some of them, it's a sign of thank you, good cooking, I enjoyed it, if burp at the dinner table. It's a little custom. Well, how do we know if we go out there banging on the tree isn't a direct threat to their family? We don't know. So there's nothing I want to go out there, and even though I might have good intentions on doing something that might be construed by them as violent towards them or something that's going to cause them to go into protection mode, especially, and attack, How do I know the baby isn't just out of sight and mom and dad aren't too happy,
I had a guy on one time that told me that he had ran into one, and I've told this story before on the show, but basically what happened is he ran into one. It seemed docile to him, and he smiled. And this thing bluff charged him, and he couldn't figure out why that it had bluff charged him. And I explained to him, in the primate world, when you show your teeth, to us a smile means something different than when you do it to a gorilla or to a chimp. You smile at a gorilla or a chimp, and it pisses them off because it's an aggressive move on your part in their eyes. So you're right. You never know what you're going to do that might just set something off. But it changed his mind on when he had this encounter. Maybe the people we've had on the show, maybe stop and listen to what they have to say, because, these things, they may walk away from you, but they may not. And if they don't, you're in trouble.
Exactly. And another example showing the teeth for somebody that might not be familiar with primates. How many people have ever watched a show or a movie or documentary or anything where the wolf is mad and his lips and his teeth are all exposed? That's not a sign of come on over, I'll sniff your hand.
Yeah.
That's a wolf. It goes through many more things in the animal kingdom than just a primate. But I'm pretty sure Jane Goodall doesn't walk out there and show her teeth to her friendly gorillas, much less somebody going to walk out there and find one that's 8 foot tall and, sorry, it's not me.
Yeah, and I don't want to keep it too long, but, even Jane Goodall, to be honest with you, and this is something no one ever talks about. I always hear in the Bigfoot world, let's do the Jane Goodall approach. Let's do the Jane Goodall approach. Well, if you go and you actually watch a lot of Jane Goodall's documentaries that she's done, if you read any of her work, there was a lot of moments to where that she wasn't running into the happy, friendly forest monkeys of the forest. There was times to where one almost killed her. And she didn't know, she will be first to say that it wasn't something, it was unprovoked. It was this one primate that basically had it out for her. And every time she came around, I guess he beat her a couple times and tried to kill her a couple times, smashed rocks against her head. And when she wasn't dead, he came back to finish the job and tried to push her over a cliff. You're dealing with a wild animal. You're dealing with a very intelligent primate.
Yeah, basically that's somebody that most of the world would consider an expert in her field. And she's using her better judgment, and still it didn't work. And we're talking, Sasquatch can be an animal that's twice the size. And I don't know, there's not enough of them that anybody have had any kind of friendly encounters with for me to even slightly change my mind right now. I'm kind of happy staying right here on the edge of the city where I'm at, but still I have dreams that, as I sit in the facilities in the house, I have a window right next to me, and my eye level would be about 6 foot outside. And I just have dreams occasionally that I look over and this thing is going to be staring in my window at me, and I can't remove myself from my current situation quick enough to exit the room,
Yeah.
It's given me some things to think about, so it's not really traumatized me too much, but it's given me a healthy respect for more than what I thought was out there before.
Yeah. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. I can't thank you enough for sharing your family's encounter. I know it's not, not easy sometimes looking back at these situations, knowing what you went through, what your mom went through, what your mom saw, what your sister saw. These aren't really great memories to share, but I really do appreciate you coming on and sharing them. And I think the more and more people that do that, it'll encourage others to come forward and share their encounters. So I really want to thank you for being on the show.
That's kind of my goal is, like you said, I come on and share, and hopefully somebody else will too. And we can get as much information out there as we can so we can build the best knowledge on these creatures that's possible without, having to send somebody out there to do it fresh. You get it from history, basically. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Bill. Next on the show, is Tara. Tara had an interesting encounter. Actually, she had two interesting encounters. And I want to go ahead and welcome Tara to the show. And Tara, if you would, please go ahead and just walk us into your encounter. Tell us what you were doing, tell us what you saw, and give us everything that happened that night.
The first encounter it happened a lot of years ago. I was still in high school, and I had worked at a pizza place in town, and we lived up the river in the town we lived in, and it kind of bordered along the Kalmiopsis Wilderness in southern Oregon. And I worked the night shift or the evening shift, so I usually didn't get off work till 10 or 11. So by the time I was heading home, it was almost midnight. There was, it was a curvy road going along a river. So I came around the corner and it kind of straightened out a little, and I saw this thing. Instantly, my brain knew what it was, but it's still one of those things that gets you dumbfounded.
Right.
You're like, did I just see what I thought I saw? And it had more of a human-formed head and shoulders, where it didn't have the big, thick neck on it.
What was it doing? Was it just walking across the road?
No, I didn't see it walk across the road. It was kind of like peeking out around behind a tree, and it just kind of watched me, and I was slowing down, trying to look at it, and it didn't budge. I just kept going, but it just kept kind of watching me. At the time, I didn't really think about if it was a juvenile, if there was like a mom around or a family, because it just seemed very curious, the car and the headlights and stuff like that.
Now, did you get a good look at the creature as you were coming around? And then one thing a lot of people are going to ask is, why don't you think it might have been a person? Kind of describe why you don't think it was a person.
Yeah, because it was still fairly tall. I would say probably 6 to 7 foot. It was definitely not human-like. It definitely had hair all over it, and it definitely wasn't a bear. It had the face similar, like a lot of people talk about. It had the Bigfoot-looking face. It's almost ape-like, dark brown fur, hair. I'm not sure what you call it on that. Where we had lived up there, we were used to seeing bear and bobcats and mountain lions, so I definitely knew it was none of those.
Yeah,
and,
I can imagine as you're coming around the corner just seeing this thing and a million things are going through your head. Had you known about Bigfoot and Sasquatch prior to this encounter?
I did. I believed in it. I never really had experienced anything like that, but I never doubted it was out there either.
So when you see this thing, you kind of already believe that Bigfoot exists, and it's crazy how you doubt yourself, isn't it? Isn't it crazy how you stop and go, man, what did I really see that?
Yeah, I kind of had that thought, but I mean, I didn't doubt what it was. Right. I was kind of like, wow, did that just happen? Because I knew instantly as soon as I saw it, I had no doubt what it was, but it just kind of was dumbfounded, like, oh my gosh, that just happened.
And so what did you do next?
Well, it was late, so I still had another mile to drive home. So I went home, went to bed. The next day I got up and I was talking to my mom about, this incident I had the night before. And my mom kind of just stopped me and she was like, asking me kind of where it was. And I said, oh, it's like a mile down the road. And it was kind of like a pasture on one side. And there was a little schoolhouse there. But on the other side of the road is where I had seen him, and it was trees. And so my mom, when she stopped me, she's like, oh my gosh, your dad saw the same thing right in that same area, like a day or two before.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah, it just kind of confirmed that it was definitely around that area.
How long was it before your next encounter?
I would say 91 when I had that one. And then I probably 94 was the second one. And this one was a totally different area. My ex-husband at the time, his grandparents lived in this really small town called Hind Palm, California. It's probably only 30 miles or so from Willow Creek area. And at first, I didn't realize what was happening. We were out there And the first part, they had all these lands, and they had these gardens kind of in different areas, and probably 100 to 200 yards away, they had like a vineyard, and it kind of went up a little hill. And then it was, at the bottom, there was a big pond and stuff. But on the other side of the vineyard, they just left it wild, and let it kind of be. But it was fenced off. And my ex-husband and I, we used to hike up in the wilderness, and, we had seen bear and not bobcats, but we saw mountain lions out there. So we knew that there was wild creatures out there. And we were coming back towards the vineyard, and there was this huge pile of, poop. And, from seeing other wild animals scat and stuff, there was no way it was bear or mountain lion or anything, because you could tell by what was in it. There was like cherry pits and stuff like that a carnivore wouldn't eat. But there was stuff like a bear would eat, but it wasn't shaped like bear scat. And it was probably a good, almost like, if you put it in a milk jug, it was probably like almost 2 gallons worth.
Oh, Jesus. Was it, was it more human shape?
It was definitely human shaped. Or, can you have a dog and you see a pile of dog poop? It was very log shaped.
I got you.
It wasn't like a splatter. It wasn't pelleted. It was ball firm the whole way. And I was like talking to my ex-husband, and I said, well, look at this. This is crazy. And he was just, tried to brush it off because he did not believe in Bigfoot at all. So I just kind of was like, okay, but, it just kind of always stuck in my mind. And so that was probably, approaching evening time. So then we went in and, did some family stuff. And then later that evening, I took a bath. And the way that their little cabin was set up, like the door opened, and then the bathtub, it opened towards like where you put the head for the bathtub.
Right.
And it was one of those old-fashioned big porcelain clawfoot tubs. So it took forever to fill up. So I was in there for quite a while, and the bathtub faced this little window that was it was higher up on the wall. My son was like 2 at the time, so then I kind of bathed him and sent him off with my ex-husband, and I continued to take a bath, and me thinking my ex-husband, who was this practical joker kind of guy, I thought he had went outside and was looking in the window, and I'm sitting there, oh, yeah, I see you right there, and totally talking to it, and, didn't really say anything, and it stayed there for quite a while, and I'm just talking to it. So by the time I was done with the bath and everything, I went out into the living room, and everybody was still sitting there. So I was thinking to myself, well, that was really crazy. But in my head, I was still thinking, oh, yeah, it had to be my ex. So the next day, we had went outside, and for me, I was like, I want to see if he was standing on a chair, excuse me, or a wood pile, or what he was doing, so we could see inside this window. And there was no chair, no wood pile, nothing anywhere near there. And that window was a good 7-8 feet off the ground.
Oh, wow.
So then in my mind, it dawned on me, I was like, oh my gosh, that had to have been, because, it was dark. You could see, it was definitely, it was just like head, because the window was so high and it wasn't real big, but you could definitely see head and eyes. Something was watching me. It just finally had dawned on me that had to have been a Bigfoot, because the other side of their yard, it was just more forest out there. There would be nothing else that tall to have been looking in that window.
So when you were looking at it, were you looking at just kind of an outline of a person? I'm assuming you probably didn't get a lot of details because all the light is where you're at. And
Yeah, I definitely could see the, head form, and if you could see it was like moving back and forth, so it wasn't like my eyes weren't like playing tricks on me. It was, you could actually see something there, and, a little bit of definition, and like there was eyes and stuff there.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, especially afterwards, and you're like, oh my gosh, I was like in there,
Yeah.
butt naked and taking a bath, and it's just sitting there
Watching
looking in the window. Yeah.
Did you tell your husband about it? What did he say?
He didn't believe in anything, so it was kind of pointless to really talk to him about it. Yeah, I never really brought that stuff up to him anymore after he kind of made fun of it. And later in life, I'd seen him making fun of people doing the Bigfoot parties, looking for him and stuff like that. But where his grandparents had lived, we weren't there. We used to probably go, we lived like 3 hours away up in Southern Oregon. We'd go down there like once a month to check on his grandparents and stuff. And his grandmother had said they had this screened-in porch, and they had like a freezer, and it's kind of where she kept most of her pantry stuff. And she said something got in there and had like tore the whole room apart and like got into the freezer. She kept saying, "Oh, it was just a bear," and I'm like, okay, I wasn't quite convinced with that part.
Yeah.
Because, the whole door was pulled off, and to get into the freezer, I don't know. So that one I question if it really was a bear or not.
Yeah, usually when a bear does something like that, usually it leaves telltale signs of it being a bear. Like the cabin that was attacked, I think it was on Monster Quest, and the guy, people were saying, well, it was probably a bear, but the fridge had been opened. It had opened all the cupboards. I mean, this thing had gone through, it had to have hands. It had to have hands when it was going through tearing this place apart. And you're right, for it to get into a freezer, I mean, unless a bear's lucky, you almost need hands to open a freezer and get in there, and you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. That's why I was skeptical when she said, "Oh yeah, it was just a bear," and I don't know what their belief of any of that was, but I know, probably within the next year they moved out of there. I don't know if they ever had any kind of strange things happen there, or obviously they did. I think they always just tried to tell everybody else, "Oh yeah, it was just a bear." So
Godspeed to the new homeowners and their bath taking.
Yeah, for sure. But and there was always at night, if you were outside, there was always like an eerie feeling outside. To me, I did not like being outside there.
Just got a bad vibe from the place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they always had dogs. When it was, you could tell if it was a bear or mountain lion, stuff that they were really used to. They'd take off running. You could hear them take off running and barking, but sometimes you just get this eerie feeling, and the dogs were going nowhere.
Yeah.
Who knows? I know. I mean, I didn't really start thinking about a whole lot about Bigfoot until like after some of that stuff. One time we had stopped in Willow Creek, and we had stopped at a mechanic place. Our car was having trouble, and like on the wall at the mechanic shop, he had all this stuff about the Patty film and how, it wasn't that far away. And I'm like, oh, well, that's kind of creepy, because I was young and naive kind of back in those days. I was like, between 17 and 22 maybe when I had that happen.
Well, those are, I mean, that's an amazing encounter. Both of those encounters are, and, I can't thank you enough for coming forward. And I think I've seen you guys on Facebook. Your husband's William, right?
Yes.
He's got the beard. He's kind of looks like he could be my brother.
Yes.
Well,
he's been pushing me to come on the show, and I'm like, they're not real exciting, I mean.
No, it's good stuff. I mean, it's
when I think about that, I'm like, and I don't care. I mean, the sightings I've had, I believe what I saw. And if somebody wants to say, "Oh, you made that up," why would I make up something like that? Why wouldn't I go big? If I was going to make something up.
Yeah, no, I mean, most encounters I think aren't real super exciting. Most encounters, it's the people who see one crossing a road, or although you had one in the back window. I mean, that's terrifying enough. That window being 7-8 feet off the ground.
Yeah.
I mean, that's terrifying enough right there. The first encounter is terrifying, especially if you're by yourself and you're in your car and you're coming around a bend. You're like, what the heck is that?
Yeah, see, and back at that time, I didn't even think to, like, go look and see if there were footprints or anything like that. Nowadays I would go look for that kind of stuff, but
Yeah, most
it didn't
people
even cross my mind back then.
Yeah, most people have encounters. It doesn't cross their mind. Well, thank you again, Tara, for coming on the show. I really do appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.